Yeah, all good. Hey everyone, my name is Austin. I'm a senior product designer on the Foundations team. Today, I just wanted to share a little perspective with you on my journey into the Foundations group, but also what I've been working on in terms of the navigation to help share a little transparency into what that workflow has looked like. So just jumping into it, a little background on like why I care about navigation a lot. I've been a long time lurker of both the discussion and research around the topic. Many people have asked me like why I switched to Foundations. It was one of the things that I was most excited to see the group become responsible for when it became formally a team. And so I joined officially in 1410. And like I was saying, I followed a lot of discussions and research before. So what I wanted to start with was just an open retrospective with a handful of the designers that have worked in this area. So I tagged a few designers and posed a few prompts to them just to better understand like what were some of the challenges that they were facing to inform things that I would probably encounter myself. I'm not so foolish to think that I could figure everything out on my own. So what I was really appreciative of was just the very thoughtful input I got from Tori and Jeremy, as well as Marcel and Michael Lay. One thing that Michael had added in was just this picture from It's Always Sunny. It is very true. This is how it feels to think about navigation problems. Everything is connected and you feel like you're losing your mind when you're trying to account for all of those things. So getting to hear from all of their different perspectives and their passions really got me energized going into the team. And so if you look at it, if you consider how many issues we have open today, there are currently, I'm just going off labels here, which aren't perfect, but there's about 200 plus issues around navigation specifically if we cut out settings and just focus on nav items. So then it becomes like, where the heck do we start as a team? There's so much history here. The way I've described this to a few is it feels like I moved into a house, like a fraternity house where so many people have lived before. Things are in a little bit of a disarray. There are some really great ideas. There are some really old lingering ideas. Many are conflicting with each other. And so what that has looked like is some manual triage by both me and my product manager, each milestone just kind of whittling away, trying to surface what's been relevant. There have been some good epics created from past product managers that helped highlight some key themes, some areas that we consider. But that was just, like the tip of the iceberg. If we can only see, what's on the surface there. So like I was saying, I've spent a lot of my time just reading previous issues, threads, research. Kat had done a ton of UX research last year in terms of looking at the information architecture of the pages. And as a result, there was a lot of work that had been done for navigation. Just looking back to those past decisions was really helpful for me just catching up to where things were. It's both like the benefit and drawback to having so much of our work done in GitLab. I feel like I could never actually reach the end of all the content that's there. So I do try and also lean on those people that are still around that I can ask more questions to. So what I've learned is, there are some great designers as well as product managers and engineers that have all worked on these problems at some point. And if I'm having a thought, it's likely that one of them have also had that thought. So it's been great to lean on them to talk about specific decisions that have been made in the past, looking at design trade-offs, and just trying to figure out where to go from there. So there's sometimes a lot of negativity talks about navigation, but I also want to highlight what I think is great. So just comparing to some of like Nielsen Norman principles around navigation, some things that stand out to me that I think are really good. Specifically, I think the scaffolding that we use to architect the way that users orient themselves in our product is good. Our global navigation, so that's that top bar, it is stable. I'll ignore like maybe when you're signed in, signed out, a little less stable in that sense. But for the most part, that's not going to really change when you're signed into the product, which is good. Users can trust that their options will be there as they're progressing through different areas. And then we even use the left sidebar to give them some more localized information about the thing that they're working on. And from there, they can use that to become familiarized with the tree. We do that by putting things into submenus, allowing them to thumb through and find what they're looking for. We don't duplicate things necessarily. So we're not just putting everything that's in the left sidebar at the top. We're not just duplicating a bunch of words. It's more specific to what GitLab team members are used to in terms of the scope of things, but we're looking for better ways to inform users with that. But we also avoid doing dropdown with another dropdown with another dropdown, or maybe rather a list box with another list box with another list box. We only keep it to one. So the farthest you're going to go is one here. Up here, you're going to go into one as well. And that just helps users progress a little bit easier when they're going through the product. Also note that it's very fast. I mean, these sections in the left sidebar load fast, same with the menu, same with the global search. These things are very quick. So the responsiveness is definitely a good appeal. But where can we improve? So an area that I feel like is a theme is navigating around GitLab can be hard. And this is because we have a very rich product that we continue to add and add and add to. So the biggest thing that I'm seeing is an increase in cognitive load. So a way that can help illustrate this is if you were to just look at the number of pages that we list in our navigation, the left side of this image is the project. So I think there's like 70 pages that are technically possible to get to from just left sidebar. One I'll note in particular that's not in there is the web IDE. And that's a great feature of our product, but we do tie it specifically to where it's most useful when you're in the repository. There's a button to open the web IDE. And I think that's a good, meaningful design choice. I'm going to pick on one page in particular, locked files. It's essentially just a sub view of the files that you've locked in your repository, but we make it discoverable from within the left sidebar. We've just added to the cognitive load of users that they have to see just one more thing, which could perhaps be more contextually placed if you're considering a user workflow. I understand this feature. I don't think it's been touched in like 5 or 6 years if I was looking back at some of the commit history. We just have to go make the hard decisions to fight against, this resistance to change, going against the status quo, making informed decisions. It's challenging, it's scary. Like I said, like Michael's picture from It's Always Sunny, there's so many different connection points. It's true, but if we just lean into each one at a time, take it step by step, we can make some meaningful progress. The way that I'm trying to make my next revisions and trying to understand where we want to go with navigation. I took a little time to do a design exercise. I don't remember where I read about this, but it was this concept of writing down if anybody remembers this, when you buy like a video game, like back in the 90s, on the back of it would be like this story about what would capture your attention. Like, why should you buy this game when you walk into Best Buy? I was trying to think of that in terms of our release post. So if I were to fast forward into version 16, what would I want to see as like the headliners for navigation? So before I'm even like thinking about specifically in the UI, what are some of the greater themes that I think would be meaningful? And not all of these things we're going to do. And they will probably look a lot different as we're going into each milestone, trying to decide what we want to do, what's working well, what's not. These are just a lot of the themes that I picked up from previous designers. A lot of these aren't even my own ideas. I mean, a lot of these have come from just long outstanding issues, pain points that we hear users reaffirming over and over and over again. But we just have to lean to the hard decisions, figure out how do we make it work. So that was helpful for me to collect my thoughts, share that with my product manager, so we could start discussing more of a vision, a roadmap of where we could think about tackling each milestone. And so for this milestone, what I'm focused on is the hamburger menu. So that is in the global navigation where you have the hamburger icon that says menu. We're thinking about just some different ways that we could help reduce the confusion around here. One of the key aspects that we see users using is just navigating to their groups and projects from here. The rest of the content sometimes is ignored, but what's most important to them is switching between groups and projects. So what we're going to be testing is how can we make revisions to this without degrading the experience to the point where they can no longer find the groups and projects. If we can find some meaningful choices, then we can find a solution that we can build, maybe in 15.2, maybe in 15.3. So I've got a few designs open. right now that I'm thinking through. One that includes integrating more closely with global search. This ties back to the pattern that users are using to go between groups and projects in the top left side. Also matches some patterns we're seeing some other products. I've got another design for potentially using it as a, well, I call it a drop down, but given Jeremy's presentation, I'm not going to call it a drop down anymore. Maybe a disclosure would be a better way to describe this. Yeah, just trying to think through different ways that users could progress through keeping that contextual information, like where are they, always knowing where they are in the product. And then lastly, I haven't quite sat with this one long enough, but a context switcher. We know from the past this hasn't tested super well, so I'm apprehensive to follow with testing on this one, but still thinking through it. If you'd like to know more about those ideas, I have a link in there as well for a YouTube video that I posted, but that's it. If you have any questions, let me know.
There's no questions currently in the agenda, but I don't believe that nobody has a question. So I'm going to wait a second.
Okay.
Valerie, you want to verbalize what you're about to type?
Sure, I can do that. I was trying to figure out how to phrase it, but I just really appreciate the way that you broke this down. I love the thought of, you know, the example that you gave of what would be on the back of that video game. That is what I think we should all be doing. We should all be thinking about what that future might be. And that's a great way to frame it so that you can then have a discussion with your product manager. Some of you may have heard me talk about design establishing a clear point of view. And that is definitely an exercise that can help you craft that. So thank you so much for sharing that, Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really did help me think through it as well. Just have some space to write down my thoughts, kind of shape them together and see how things may relate to one another or not. I am also a very visual person, so it's hard sometimes to make me write things down in just words alone, but it does help abstract concepts a bit more.
Since no one else is putting anything in the agenda, and we have a little time, I'll ask you. So this was great. Austin, you and I have been really closely connected on this entire initiative. I'm so pleased with the work that you're doing. I think you've got great rationale for starting with that top hamburger menu. That makes a ton of sense. Could you briefly talk about, you touched on the left nav. We know the left nav needs changes. We also know that the left nav is associated with that top navigation. So we have to think about those things together. I know you have a good plan for this. You want to talk a little bit more about what your next steps are? Yeah, so in terms of the left sidebar, the biggest thing that we hear around it is the information architecture is overwhelming to users. So what I was using that image to help illustrate is we just do the easy thing, which is create a link to almost every single page that's accessible from a project level. Probably not the best idea. We could do better to think more critically about what we choose to put in that left sidebar. That's one way that we could reduce the number of items, just the sheer volume of them. But we have some other hypotheses, like we would love to go test further, like reducing the number of parent items, just to help aggregate together the things users care about. I'm interested in looking at even making that list smaller based off of some of the usage data that we're seeing. There are definitely some pages that users visit way more than others, and should we treat them all equally at the same level? I think that's something we want to lean into further and some upcoming milestones. So just looking at some of the pages that users are going between, off the top of my head, I know users are jumping between issues, merge requests, branches, and pipelines. If you look at like just the trends of where their URLs are going, it makes sense to probably put those things together and then find other ways to make those secondary items accessible in a different way.
So we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to shape up, but we have a few ideas where we'd like to investigate further for the left sidebar specifically and upcoming milestones. And then in terms of incorporating the global navigation, we're trying to make sure that both the left sidebar stays specific to the context that you're in, and that the global navigation can remain that stable counterpart that helps you reorient your work.
Yeah, that's great. For anyone who doesn't know, there's a lot of navigation research happening right now that'll help give better information about that left sidebar. And the way that I understand it, Austin, is so you're starting with this top hamburger menu, you're getting this into validation. You're going to come away from that with a direction, one direction, you're going to converge. Then you're going to start looking at that left nav. You're going to have multiple options. You're going to diverge there. You're going to run that through validation. You're going to converge. You're going to think about those two things together, and we're going to go from there. So implementation will happen reasonably quickly after that, as soon as we start to feel confident that we understand what those structures need to be. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't necessarily like definitively say like, yeah, like the left sidebar is the next thing on the docket. I think we're still trying to figure that out from like a prioritization matrix. But yes, we're just trying to find ways that we can also help remove some content, because it can give us options to bring in more useful features that we just basically don't have space for right now. Like I would say an area that we do a okay job at is helping users pick up where they left off. I mean, the thing that I see like software engineers using the most is the alert they get to create a merge request after they push a branch. Helping users pick up work when they come from some other place, I think is really important. And something I personally lose context of all the time is when I am like drafting a comment and I close my tab, I don't know if I ever sent that one. And sometimes I find that I didn't. So being able to help users jump back into that workflow, I would love to start putting that in the navigation, but right now it's just too dense. We have to find ways to remove what isn't as meaningful right now. Cool. Great question, Christy.
Will, do
Will
you
or
want to
Blair?
vocalize? Yeah.
Yeah, I can vocalize. So I appreciate all the work, Austin, that you're doing in this space. You know, I'm personally excited to see what comes out of the work that you talked about in regards to the hamburger menu for 15.1. I've been doing some research for the global search team and have seen, you know, firsthand how users have difficulty knowing when to use that hamburger menu versus the global search header. It seems like the hamburger menu is a little bit more approachable just because you can know exactly what you're searching for in regards to either a group or a project, while global search is a little bit maybe too broad for some people. So I'm glad that the designs that you're proposing are trying to tackle that problem a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Will. I've seen firsthand like users say, I wish I could search for projects and groups in the same place. I'm like, you can. But I do think this menu item has a strong gravitational pull, and so then they feel that they have to be able to switch between them. But if only they use this little tool, they will learn. They can search in both places already. So yeah, we're looking into ways to make that pattern a little easier to discover.
Great, thanks, Austin.
Yeah. Blair, we got 1
You
minute.
have the last comment.
Of course, I'm right at the very end. I'll just squeeze in my 2 comments. They date me as a designer, but I love the thinking here. I think Valerie was kind of pointed out the sort of back of the game cartridge sort of sale thing, but I was thinking like the press release, like thinking of it in the future of like, when we announce this, what's it going to look like? And that will help sort of drive our longer term vision. That's a theme, sort of a trend that we did at my last job, as well as when you were talking about just like we brought up the picture down there at the bottom of the thumbnail where nothing is contextual. We just sort of unload everything to the user, and sort of how we could sort of make it contextual. And even though those are really tiny itty bitty little things, the more we do it and the more we push it throughout global, it's going to make a huge impact on cognitive load for the user. It reminded me of the first time I heard of Minified Css. I was like, there's no way getting rid of spaces and stuff is going to do anything. And then sure enough, I think it was Facebook in particular, minifying their CSS, like improved their performance by like 40%. It was insane. So it sort of reminded me of those two things, and I made it.
Awesome. With that, thank you so much, Austin. This is a great presentation. Appreciate you running through all that.